maybe the only three senators on Capitol Hill that we can say that are fighting the good cause, fighting the fight for liberty, who are carrying our banner and are doing a great job. Now, you'll notice tonight all three of them were newly elected. The Senate was very dark and dormant prior to this, but they've raised a lot of headlines and have made a lot of news lately. So we're going to have a discussion with them this evening. We call it our Senate Roundtable, and I would like to welcome out Senator Paul, Senator Lee, and Senator Cruz. Let's get started. Well, I want to welcome you all for coming. Thank you so much. This is our 5th annual national convention. We have over 300 leaders from over 200 college chapters in over 46 states. So our movement is continuing to grow. This is our largest annual national convention. And I just want to kind of start out, give you a chance to introduce yourself. And tell us about when you were a young student, when you were in college. Were you inspired by these ideas then? Have you discovered these ideas? How were you as a college student? Were you active at all politically? Senator Lee, do you want to go ahead and start this for us?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for that warm welcome. We're not accustomed to that kind of welcome in Washington. There are people just a few miles from here who give us quite the opposite reception. Makes it all the more welcome. I was politically active in college. I was politically active right off in 5th grade. I don't think I realized until I was 30 that not everybody talks about the 4th Amendment around the dinner table, but it's what we did in my house. Not sure why, but it just sort of happened that way. So I've always been interested in government, interested in politics, and from a young age I had a strong passion for government, and specifically for restrictions on government. It bothered me that the talk was always about expanding the role of government, particularly the federal government. And so I got involved in teenage Republicans in high school and college Republicans in college. It bothered me to an increasing degree that fellow Republicans didn't always act like Republicans, and by act like Republicans I mean they didn't always stick with the basic premises of our party, which include limited government, following the Constitution quite literally, and looking to the founding era to figure out what exactly the restraints on government are.
Senator Cruz, I pose the same question to you. Let us know, when you were a college student just like us, how were you raised and what kind of political philosophy did you have?
Well, thank you. It is great to be here. It seems there may be a few wacko birds in the house. Well, I will say it is an honor to join y'all, and it is an honor to be sitting side by side with Rand and Mike and to be fighting alongside each of you. In college, and actually for me, really high school was when my passion for liberty was ignited. I got, as a freshman in high school, got involved with a group in Houston called the Free Enterprise Institute that had high school students study free market economics, and we would read Milton Friedman and Hayek and von Mises and Bastiat. And then we would tour around as high school kids and give speeches on free market economics and give speeches on the Constitution. And a group of us, 5 of us, high school students, spent a couple of hundred hours studying the Constitution and actually memorized a shortened mnemonic version of the Constitution. And we toured Texas speaking about the Constitution, the need to get back to it. And I will say that intellectual grounding was I think, combined with my family experience, which is that my dad, as a teenager, had been imprisoned and tortured in Cuba. He'd been beaten almost to death. And when he fled Cuba, fled the Batista regime in 1957, came to Texas. And he was penniless. He couldn't speak English. He had $100 sewn in his underwear. And he washed dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And paid his way through the University of Texas. Went on to... We may have a few Longhorns here. And I recognize not all. Are you guys going to win football all this year?
SEC, I hope so.
But you know, I'll tell you, I think it is an incredible blessing to be the son of an immigrant who fled oppression, because it makes you realize just how precious liberty is and how fragile it is. I mean, when I was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, my dad would say to me all the time, he'd say, when we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? And I felt and continue to feel incredibly grateful for the tremendous blessings of freedom we have, and the idea that now I can fight with Rand and Mike to try to turn things around and get back to our constitutional principles, our free market principles, is extraordinary.
Well, it's great to be here. What a great crowd. And if y'all could just be a little louder and more enthusiastic. So when I was in college, I was in the library. I was in the library every night, home in bed by 9 o'clock. I never drank any beer or smoked any pot. Oh, actually, no, that's Mike Lee's story. I'm stealing Mike Lee's story.
Your case, George.
But no, I had a good time when I was a kid, and I didn't. But you know, I still, somehow finished college, and went on to some other things. But it's kind of neat being up here with these really, really smart constitutional attorneys. But I still like arguing with them, even though we're on the same side of so many issues. I like to debate them over, right to privacy, the Lochner case, and all these different obscure topics. But I tell them that it's sort of like golf, that it has to be handicapped. Since they both clerk for Supreme Court justices, they're like scratch golfers, 0 handicap, and I'm like, I'm just a doctor, okay? So I gotta have at least 20 strokes or 20 constitutional cases. But what's good about it is, I can talk all I want about the Constitution, all these constitutional cases. If I make a mistake, I say, well, I went to medical school. I didn't go to law school. I don't remember all of it. But we've had an exciting day today. This morning, we had a debate over whether or not we should continue to send military aid to Egypt. Anybody? I think we won the debate on the substance, but I kept telling them it's not about whether you should give aid to Egypt or not. It's about the law. Are you going to obey the law or not? And they claim to be, the Republicans, I don't really care. The Democrats weren't going to vote for this. The Democrats are for anything that's got dollars attached to. They don't care how much we print, how much we spend, how big the debt is. But the Republicans claim they care. They also claim they care about the rule of law. But it's like the law is pretty explicit. But the president's the funniest press conference I've ever seen. The president comes on, not him, his spokesman comes on and says, well, yeah, it could be a coup. It probably is a coup, but you can't make me decide. You can't make me make a judgment. He's like a third grader. He said, nah, you can't make me call it a coup. So that is really their game plan now. It's absolutely a military coup, but you just can't make them make the decision. And that's kind of what we had this debate on. And we lost overwhelmingly, but the Wacko Bird Conference was 100% against sending any more aid.
So, Senator Paul, you held your famous 13-hour filibuster to demand answers from the White House. And me personally, and probably others in this room, that was the longest they've ever watched C-SPAN in their life. I literally think I watched 12 hours of C-SPAN that day. It was an incredible feat. Just myself trying to watch it, let alone you standing there not going to the restroom on top of it all. But I did want to ask, though, is you were quickly criticized as wacko birds, as you alluded to, from Senator McCain. And there seems to be an old guard that's now passing in the Republican Party and this new breath of fresh air that's coming in. Do you sense that? Do you see that? And how would you compare this old guard with the new guard and what you're seeing right now on Capitol Hill?
I think that when you look at the contrast between it, the old guard is part of a shrinking Republican Party. This, we hope that this is going to be Republican energy, that you come our direction towards our party, but that you make our party more freedom-loving and more libertarian and more liberty-loving. But the thing is that that's where the growth potential is. The growth potential isn't in what they're talking about. They're presiding over a dying party. They're presiding over an all-white, dying, everybody's in a tie, everybody belongs to the Chamber of Commerce. And I don't have anything against business. I love business. But the thing is, I tell people we need white people, we need brown people, we need black people, we need people with ponytails, people with tattoos, people without tattoos. We need everybody. But I would say it's precisely the libertarian type issues that grow the party.
Right. Now, continuing on the libertarian type issues like civil liberties, the FBI recently responded to your letter. And you allowed the nomination to go through. But was the response adequate, do you believe? And what scares you the most about our current domestic drone policies?
Well, this is a great issue, and I want to hear the constitutional attorneys on this. They sent a first letter, and they said, we have been using drones, but we haven't used any warrants. And I said, but they said they would if they thought someone had a reasonable expectation of privacy. And so I said, well, when do you think someone will have a reasonable expectation of privacy? Give me some examples. So they wrote me back another letter, and this is why I dropped my filibuster and let them vote on him. And I really don't have anything against him. I just really voted no just because I was kind of pissed off. And but the thing, I still wanted to send a protest on the drones, but his final letter on the drones was, he said, we think that Supreme Court cases say you don't need and have ruled for manned surveillance, you don't need a warrant. It's this open spaces kind of doctrine. I think it needs to be revisited because of the technology advancements and also because we're not talking about pot in a cornfield. We're now talking about your backyard, whether you're drinking a beer, whether you're reading Reason magazine, what you're reading there. And so I'd like to ask Ted and Mike what they think about open spaces doctrine, whether it has to be revisited. Should you have a warrant to have a drone surveillance, that kind of thing?
Well, at least what the Supreme Court has said, in your backyard, what the court calls your curtilage, the immediate surrounding space of your house, the court has said you have a reasonable expectation for privacy. And so if the FBI is using the drone to monitor someone in their backyard, in all likelihood, what they find from there may well be excluded from a court of law.
And that's not what they told me there. They sort of said that manned surveillance wasn't limited. They didn't talk about your fence, your backyard, or anything like that.
The court has said if it's going down the street,
right,
you can surveil that, but your immediate home and surroundings, you have an expectation of privacy. But there's a broader problem here, which is that you look at this administration, and they are collecting data about law-abiding citizens in just about every way, shape, and form, whether it is the NSA and phone metadata, or emails, whether it is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau collecting financial information, whether it is, the Obama administration went before the U.S. Supreme Court last year, and it argued that it is entitled to go and put a GPS sensor on your car with no probable cause, just because the federal government wants to know where you are. Now, I'm proud to say the U.S. Supreme Court rejected the Obama administration's argument unanimously. And I'll tell you, I'm very concerned by the balance the Obama administration has taken, in that I think they've dropped the ball actually on both sides of civil liberties and national security. We've got some instances with terrorists, whether it was the Boston bombers or the Fort Hood shooter, where there was considerable evidence that these people were involved with radical terrorism. And yet, for whatever reason, law enforcement dropped the ball and didn't actually stop the terrorist act from those people for whom they had considerable information that we needed to be very cautious about them. And at the same time, they want to sweep in private information about law-abiding citizens willy-nilly. I think they've got it exactly backwards. We ought to go after the bad guys and protect the privacy of the good guys. And by the way, that was Janet Napolitano who turned the lights on.
Well, Senator Lee, let me ask you on that question. I actually had a follow-up to that. Was you have a bill, many people might not know in this room, that actually the government, they don't even need a subpoena, can hold your emails for 180 days if they've been opened, or more than 180 days old. But you have a bill.
That's not my bill. That's existing law. My bill's trying to correct that.
To correct that, right.
Just didn't want to incite the crowd to violence.
So the bill that you do have, though, where does it currently stand, and do you see any possibility of it passing the Senate and signed by the President in the near future?
Yeah, hey, happy to speak to that. So a lot of people are alarmed and deeply disturbed to learn this. But once your email ripens to the really old age of 180 days, it no longer has any protection under existing law. It's completely wrong. I think it's unconstitutional. But after 180 days, the government can get to it just because it's 180 days old. It was a law written back in 1986. I'm sure most of you were not even alive in 1986. The existence of email was hardly known to anyone in 1986, and hardly anyone that had email had even the ability, the capacity on their computer to keep an email for longer than 180 days. So it resulted from just an oversight. And we're trying to update the law to make clear that there really is no difference between an email that you have for Fourth Amendment purposes that's 179 days old and one that's 181 days old. So the status of that is, after a fair amount of fighting, which really is odd because this should not be controversial, we got it passed through the Judiciary Committee a few weeks ago. We're trying to get it passed by the Senate floor right now. There still is some opposition to it for people who say, well, the Securities and Exchange Commission and a few other federal agencies might sometimes really need access to this information. My response to that is, well, they might sometimes really feel like they need access to your mail as well, and yet we don't give them the power to go and open it, do we? So I think we've got to get this passed. So anytime you get the chance, call your senator, call your congressman, say, please pass the ECPA modernization amendments.
Does it have a bill tied to it? What, the ECPA you said?
Yeah. Jeff, one quick comment on that. Really, your email ought to have at least the same protection as your snail mail. So your snail mail can sit, in a safety deposit box, and they still can't get to it unless they have probable cause. But one of the senators, and we won't name any names, he's a Republican from a state just south of North Carolina. He said that he didn't care if we censored all of the mail. That's scary. That's pretty scary. But the thing about it is that I think that, the whole concept, it gets to this idea of some of these people are saying, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. That's kind of, quite a step below innocent until proven guilty. And but we do have to fight against that because people are fearful. I don't like terrorists. I want to get terrorists too, but at the same time, I want to preserve our liberty, but realize that that's what we're up against. And don't let your guard down. But I think Mike's bill has a great chance of passing.
I have to note, Rand, I don't know if this was you, but I saw somebody called for that particular senator, if he was not concerned about the privacy of his email, to post online his email password so everyone could read it.
I think that was true.
Was that
No, I would love to take credit for that, but that idea was really great, but it wasn't mine. I think it was FreedomWorks.
Oh, was it? I
think Freedom
Okay.
If I could just add, this is especially important in a day and age when everything is a crime. That's one of the problems we've got, is we've had this absolute proliferation of criminal laws, and then we've seen an absolute proliferation of federal criminal laws. So we've been over-criminalizing conduct generally, then we've been over-federalizing criminal law. We've got to turn that around, and in the meantime, regardless of when or whether or to what extent it turns around, one of the many reasons why this matters and why it ought to matter to people even outside of the liberty movement is because everything these days has the potential to become a crime or something that's going to get you in trouble with an increasingly brooding and increasingly bullying federal government.
Senator Paul, I want to go back to, you mentioned foreign aid and talk about foreign policy a little bit. You said the Senate voted on today. There were only, I think, 13 votes in favor of the amendment. It seems odd that, I don't understand why it's so difficult that we can't understand the concept of we shouldn't be borrowing money from other countries to give that money to other countries. What is the argument you hear on the Senate floor from senators of why they can't support this?
They take sort of a funny argument. They say we won't have leverage to affect the behavior of Egypt if we don't keep giving them tanks and planes. And I say, well, even if you believe foreign aid is a good idea, wouldn't you have more leverage if you actually withheld some aid when they misbehaved? The law says precisely that. The law says you end aid. And it's funny, people they say, oh, you're doing this radical thing, you just want to eliminate all foreign aid, which is probably true. But But that's not what I was arguing for today. The law, and here's the irony of it, every one of those guys that were down there that were for the foreign aid voted for the law. It's been going on, it's voted on every year for the last 20 years, and the law says if there's a coup, the aid ends. And it restarts when they have a vote again. So right now there's been a coup in Egypt, and if you do believe in using aid and giving aid, that it would start back immediately. It would be a big incentive for them to have an election. You would actually have some leverage if you let the aid stop or held the planes up. And maybe, I'm guessing Egypt all of a sudden, if they want those planes and tanks, would speed up their elections. So, but it's precisely the opposite, and I don't understand it at all, really their logic. But the American people aren't with them. The American people are with us on this. Agree?
Well, Jeff, let me say something on that also, which is I thought Rand at lunch yesterday made a very effective argument to our colleagues that the rule of law has to mean something. We have a law that says if a nation has had a coup d'etat, that we will cancel aid to them. And I think it is disturbing that so many members of the U.S. Senate are prepared to just disregard the law. President Obama, when he picks and chooses among the law, when he decides unilaterally, I'm not going to enforce the immigration laws, that's wrong. When he decides with Obamacare, unilaterally, I'm not going to enforce the employer mandate against large companies. Why? Because I'm not going to do it. I'm going to ignore the law. That's wrong. The Constitution, Article 2, puts a responsibility on the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And I think we can't, with any credibility, stand for rule of law for a president disregarding the law if we're not willing to be consistent and say, you got to follow the law whether you like it or not, because it means something that it's the law of the land.
So, Senator Cruz, I want to kind of stay on that topic. Many people in this room, we weren't even, I was, but so many people in this room weren't even 10 years old on 9/11. We've kind of grown up with as a generation at war. We've been at war for over a decade, and we've seen many of our friends and family go overseas and come home either scarred mentally or physically, or not come home at all. And so I ask you specifically as a constitutional lawyer, would you support a war that was not constitutionally declared by Congress?
No.
Right? Next question.
And Jeff, let me follow up on that. Look, the Constitution, the declaration of war, is one of the most important checks and balances that the Constitution gives on the power of the president. Just recently, President Obama announced that the United States is going to give weapons to the rebels in Syria. I'll confess, my first reaction, we tweeted when that happened, the simple question, I wonder if President Obama is going to insist on a background check before he gives the rebels their weapons. But in addition, I made a point to go to the Senate floor and talk about this issue. Talk about, number one, the human rights calamity that's happening in Syria. 100,000 people have been murdered, and the administration stayed silent. It didn't speak out against it. But then, if you look at the rebels right now, there are, of the 9 major rebel groups, as many as 7 of them are affiliated in some way or other with Al-Qaeda. And what I laid out in my speech was 2 very simple principles of foreign policy. Number 1, don't give weapons to people who hate us. Don't give weapons to people who want to kill us. But number 2, this change in U.S. policy was announced by a mid-level staffer in the White House holding a press conference. And the second principle was, if the President of the United States deems a military situation important enough that our national security interests justify our being involved, then the President owes it to the American people to come before them, to explain why, to come before Congress to explain why.
Any further comments? I assume it's probably right in line with both of your positions?
Yes.
Okay. Easy enough. Moving on then, so let's talk about our national debt, $16.8 trillion and counting. I remember we held our Visualize the Debt project 2 years ago when it was just at $15 trillion, and now we're approaching $17 trillion. That number is just too hard to even contextualize. $1 trillion is so big. And we've done $2 trillion, it's grown $2 trillion in 2 years. So do you see any serious cutbacks or any serious proposals, I should say, that are being put forth on Capitol Hill to even get our hands around not just the budget, but our debt at large? And I'll just start with Senator Lee, and we'll just go down there.
The short answer to your question is no. Not only do we not see any movement in that direction, but we're moving in exactly the opposite direction. A few months from now, absent the success of a very important project that Rand and Ted and I are working on, along with a few others, the biggest new entitlement program in a generation is going to kick in. an entitlement program that's going to cost us about $2 trillion just over the next decade, which is roughly double the figure that the American people were sold. And so not only are we not seeing a turnaround in this explosive growth of federal spending, we're seeing an expansion of federal spending. And it really is an issue that is becoming critical. I mean, let's think about this. So we're almost $17 trillion in debt. Much, if not most of that debt, was accumulated before most in this room were even old enough to vote. A lot of it was accumulated before any of you were born. A lot of it was accumulated even long before your parents met, and I won't go into any more details beyond that about their meeting. Or the point is that this is a really nasty form of taxation without representation. You'll be on the hook for all this money that's been spent by prior generations of Americans. And you'll be on the hook for decisions that they've made. And they had no accountability to you for those decisions. And that's a big problem, and it's a problem that we ought to be thinking about, not only for your generation, but for the generations that will come after you. One of the many reasons, thank you. So this has been so badly abused for so long that I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to fold into the Constitution something that makes it more difficult for Congress to borrow, something that requires a supermajority if Congress is going to engage in deficit spending. And we've been pushing that, and I'm going to continue to push that as long as I'm in office.
Senator Cruz?
Mike is exactly right. Congress is doing virtually nothing to rein in our uncontrollable spending. Last fall, I had the opportunity to speak at the Republican National Convention, and I talked about the national debt. I talked about our two little girls at home, Caroline and Catherine. And when I got back to the hotel room, it was about 1:30 in the morning, I pulled out my iPhone and looked at Twitter. And it turned out Paula Poundstone, the comedian, was watching the convention that night. I guess she had nothing better to do. And she sent a tweet. She said, Ted Cruz just said, when his daughter was born, the national debt was $10 trillion. Now it's $16 trillion. What the heck did she do? But the ominous thing, our daughter Caroline is 5. In her short life, our national debt has grown over 60%. And what we are doing right now is fundamentally immoral. And listen, one of the main topics of this conference is reaching young people, and y'all are ideally situated to do that. Listen, for young people, who the heck do you think is going to pay for this stuff? I mean, you know what? Our parents didn't do that to us, and their parents didn't do that to them. No generation has ever handed the next generation a national debt that is so crushing it's larger than the size of the entire economy. And young people, if we don't change course, y'all are going to spend your entire lives working not to meet the challenges of the future, not to meet whatever the challenges are of the next generation, but to pay off the debt that your parents and grandparents were too irresponsible to live within our means. And let me make a second point. You don't get to a $17 trillion national debt without a whole lot of bipartisan cooperation. It is Democrats who have driven a significant part of the spending, but an awful lot of Republicans have been complicit in doing that. I had a cynical friend of mine who once suggested a bumper sticker. Republicans, we waste less. And let me just say, I think the liberty movement is so important for getting the Republican Party back to the principles that we should have been standing for in the first place. And so many Republicans have lost sight of it. And so I just want to encourage you for your ongoing efforts to hold elected officials accountable, including me and all three of us and every member of Congress.
did not realize that this was Ted's daughter's fault. And if we just teach your daughter some fiscal...
It's hopeless. Absolutely hopeless.
But when you look at the accumulation of the debt and the continuation of the debt, it's entitlement spending. 2/3 of your budget is entitlement. Why are the entitlements broke? Too many old people, not enough young people. It's not Republicans' fault. It's not Democrats' fault. It's your great-grandparents' fault for having too many damn kids. So,
Are you suggesting that they need to live it up at the party tonight?
well... Cruz in Texas said that. Make sure you spell his name correctly, okay? I did not say anything about procreation, pot, or beer, okay? I am a believer, though, that to win battles in the country, things have to be pretty simple, and that you can get things across. You have to say things over and over again. They have to be simple. So, for example, one of the things that I support is called the penny plan. It's to cut 1% from all spending. Now, if you think national defense is more important, cut 2% from everything else, and maybe you don't have to cut national defense. Personally, I think there's waste everywhere. But the penny plan is great because if you cut 1%, a couple years ago they said the budget would balance in 5 or 6 years. Now I'm hearing estimates that it would actually balance in 3 or 4 years. The bottom line is that since we've been through this sequester, which is a cut in the rate of growth of government, but still we survived it despite the president saying the sky is falling. The president says the planes are going to crash into each other. Your meat will be rancid. The meat inspectors, we have to fire the meat inspectors. We can't fire the guy who's trying to discover how to make roll-up beef jerky. We have to fire the meat inspectors first. But I think we got beyond the charade. Everybody now knows that the president, he wasn't joking, he wasn't sarcastic. I guess he was just being dishonest. And the thing is we've gotten beyond that. So I think the whole idea that we could survive something that's an across-the-board cut, but you'd have to apply it to entitlements. This one was sort of for discretionary spending, apply it across the board to everything. And I think in the end we could really rechart the course of the country. And simple ideas. I think simple ideas are the way to go, but it really, I think, could change the future of our country if we do something like that.
Well, we've had 2 rules, and you're just advocating breaking both of them. We have no Ron Paul babies while you're here. And I'm not even going to mention the next rule. I'm not getting booed anymore. We'll move on. But you mentioned Social Security, and I'd say probably most of the room here on the way to the airport had to go through TSA and probably opted out of TSA. Boo, yes. So, so we're all trying to opt out of TSA security, but what about Social Security? Would you allow our generation to opt out of Social Security and say, look, we won't take a dime from Social Security when we'll take care of ourselves, let us keep our money? Is that a viable option? Is that something that can be proposed? And I guess, Senator Lee, you want to start with that, and we'll just move down the line.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, since you mentioned TSA, I have to tell you a quick story. When Rand and I first got sworn in about 2.5 years ago, I was going through TSA one day on my way back to Washington. Just then, my staff texted me and said, Rand Paul has been detained by TSA. So right there in the Salt Lake City International Airport, I took out my phone and I was texting him, telling him how he could probably get out of TSA detention by citing the speech and debate clause. And fortunately, he was able to be released. Okay, so let's talk about Social Security opt-out. The reason that is so appealing, probably to every single person in this room, and tell me if I'm right, is because most of you probably believe you are more likely to see Elvis alive in this lifetime than to get a dime from Social Security. Am I right? Okay, so that's about what I thought. So the reason for that, it's not arbitrary, it's not irrational that you feel that way, that you have good reason to feel that way. You've seen the government set up this program, set it up in the 1930s. It was set up as an investment program, an income security program. It was kind of like insurance, it was kind of like a savings plan. The government told the people, even though none of us were born when this happened, the government told the people, this can never be taken away. You'll pay into it, the government will safeguard it, we'll put it in a really safe box, and then we will give it to you when you retire. Well, even though they told us that, they got challenged in the Supreme Court a few years later when the FDR administration's lawyers, they were very good. They went to the Supreme Court of the United States and they argued it much differently than the way in which it was sold to the American people. In a case called Helvering versus Davis, they went to the Supreme Court and they said, oh, no, this is not a retirement plan. This is not insurance, because they knew the Supreme Court would hold that unconstitutional. You see, they knew that the Constitution doesn't authorize the federal government to create a retirement plan or an insurance plan. They said, no, this is in fact a tax. This is just tax money, and this is a tax that's paid in. Congress can choose to do with that money anything it wants. Today they might use it for Social Security benefits. Tomorrow they might use it for something else. And it was on that basis that the Supreme Court upheld it as a tax. Does that sound familiar by chance? So ever since then, Congress has been sort of doing whatever it wants with money that's supposed to be going to Social Security. Congress hasn't respected the fact that that's your money when you pay into it, that it's your parents' money when they pay into it. That's why we don't trust it. That's why we deserve to have something akin to an opt-out. Or if we don't have an opt-out, at least to have something that makes it yours. Something that says you need to be saving for your retirement. But it needs to be your money. It's your property. The government doesn't have any right to it. And the government is lying to you when it suggests that it's your money because, in fact, it's been used as a congressional revolving slush fund for generations.
Well, I'll say two things at the outset. One, Mike, I'm very, very dismayed by your implication that Elvis is not alive. I have seen no evidence of that. A second quick point. I too remember when Rand was detained by the TSA. And on Facebook, we launched a campaign, a petition to free Rand. Now, I'll confess that the meme that was chosen for that was the picture of a physician putting on a rubber glove. And for whatever reason online, that really went viral. Look, Social Security is a program that I think, as Mike powerfully illustrated, young people, and in fact just about anybody under 40, has good reason to doubt they will ever receive the benefits that have been promised. Now, that is a result of the fact that politicians have been spending the Social Security money that's being collected rather than following through on what was said, that it was in Al Gore's lockbox. But it also presents an opportunity, I think, to reform Social Security, to make the program solvent and strong. In my view, the way to reform Social Security is as follows: that we should preserve the benefits for the seniors currently receiving Social Security, because we have made promises to them, they have ordered their financial affairs, counting on those promises. In the law, there's a concept of reliance, where people act on the basis of promises. We need to honor those promises. But for young people, people our generation, there are, I think, 3 simple changes that can save Social Security and permanently strengthen it. Number one, I think we need to gradually increase the retirement age for Social Security. When Social Security was enacted, when FDR signed it into law, the average life expectancy was 62. The retirement age was 65. It was designed to kick in the very tail years of life. Now the average life expectancy is somewhere on the order of 78. And it doesn't make any sense. One of the reasons the program is insolvent is because we haven't changed the retirement age to reflect the changing demographics and longer longevity. Number two, right now Social Security grows substantially faster than inflation. If we change it so that it simply grows to match inflation rather than to exceed inflation, those two changes actually bring Social Security into solvency. But the third change, and the one that I think is most important, is that we need to provide for younger workers that every younger worker can have a significant portion of your Social Security taxes paid into a personal account that you own, that you control, and that is yours. There are a lot of reasons to support personal accounts, but I'll tell you what I think is the most powerful argument, and it's an argument that Republicans very rarely make. Many Republicans tend to do what I call putting on the green eye shade. And they talk a little bit like accountants, and they say, if you look at the long-term actuarial soundness of the Social Security system, and oddly enough, that argument doesn't move a whole lot of people. The argument that to me is so powerful about personal accounts is our current system right now. Let's take two hypothetical individuals, an African-American man working as a janitor, or an Hispanic woman in Texas cleaning houses. The current system, those two individuals can work 30, 40, 50 years, work their fingers to the bone, pay into the system all those decades. They retire. They receive a few years of benefits, and then they die. That's the status quo. That's the way the system works right now. If you had Social Security personal accounts, those same low-income workers, that African-American man working as a janitor, that Hispanic woman cleaning houses, could work 20, 30, 40 years, could pay into the system, could retire, could receive even at a very, very modest wage, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. Over the decades, that personal account will build up to $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. And when that individual dies, they own that. They can pass it on to their kids. And think of the transformational impact for someone working in a menial job to be able to pass on those assets to their kids who can use it to buy a house, to get an education, to start a business. The power of ownership. Look, our country, there has been no greater engine for prosperity than the American free market system. And we need to be working to encourage ownership and to help. You know, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the Democrat senator, described personal accounts in Social Security as an estate not just for every millionaire, but for every bellman down at the door. That's what I think is powerful about personal accounts, is helping people save and transform and expand their opportunity to achieve the American dream.
I was just minding my own business. I get to the airport. I'm not a confrontation guy. I want to get along with people. And I went through and they said they found an anomaly. And I said, an anomaly? And I said, your machines are so exquisite and so good that they can see every detail of my body, that they're now putting these blurry places on there so all the TSA people aren't getting off looking at all the you're trying to tell me your machine has such exquisite detail, but it's found an anomaly. And I said, there is no anomaly there. So I lifted my leg and showed him my knee, and I said, there's nothing there. He said, no, but I must touch you. And so I said, well, couldn't I just go back to, I was being very reasonable and using my most polite manners. And I said, couldn't I just go back through the machine again? I said, I was in Denver last week, and the nice woman there just said, yes, you can walk back through. And he said, no. And so then I was detained. And then this woman, who was the meanest, nastiest schoolmarm-looking woman you've ever met, she got this far from my nose, and I said, but my bag was sitting next to me, and I unzipped the pocket and I grabbed my phone, and she said, "That's it. You touched it. You did it. You got in your bag." And I said, "What? What?" She says, "You're going to get the full exam now." And I said, "You mean the colonoscopy too?" And she didn't think that was very funny. So she really did insist, though, that there was no way I was flying today. She was very, very much in my face. There was no way I was ever going to fly today unless I got the full exam in private. And so I decided that I would make some phone calls in front of her. And so I called my press secretary and said, "I'm being detained. Do you think you could notify some of the Nashville media, maybe the if I ever get there?" And they got very mad, and so I was detained for a while. Then they reported to the media that I was irate and I was throwing a fit. But the funniest thing in the world was I must have had some friend who worked in security for the airport. They released the footage of me being irate, and it's me sitting in a chair. And it was like on a loop for hours and hours of me just sitting there doing my phone. So finally, they really got mad at me because I was calling the press and having everybody. So then I was detained before I was evicted. And so then I was told to leave the premises. And I said, "Well, I want to be detained now." And they said, "No, you have to leave, and we will handcuff you and take you out." I said, "No." And a really big policeman came, and I said, "No, I'm going." And so we went outside. But the thing is that what I wanted to know is why I couldn't go back through the machine. So the head of the TSA eventually got there. I think his golf game was over about noon. And so he gets there, and I ask him, "Why can't I just go back through the machine?" He says, "Well, because you'd probably pass the next time." And I said, "Well, why? The machines are so exquisite. If they found an anomaly, why wouldn't it find an anomaly again?" He said, "Well, because that's how we do our random searches. People would be mad if they thought it was a random search. The machine just kicks you out and says you have an anomaly. The people searching you, they don't know this, but that's what's happening." He told me that. Another person told me that. And then later on that day, the TSA put a press release saying out, "Absolutely not. We do not. The machine is not going off randomly. We're not doing random searching." But anyway, I try to be agreeable, but on the Social Security, very briefly, I like all the points. I love Ted's point about the green eye shades and the accountants, because it reminds me when I got here, I wanted to fix the world, and I had a Social Security bill. And so I talked Mike into it, and I can't blame Mike on this, but we did the green eye shade thing. We raised the age, and we means tested, and to try to get Democrats on board, we did put the private accounts in. And I thought, I'm going to get bipartisan bills everywhere. Democrats have to know that, we have to do this. How many Democrats do we get over 2 years? 0, not one. I asked the president face-to-face. I asked the vice president face-to-face, don't we have to raise the age? Wouldn't means testing and raise the age fix all these problems? They both say yes in private, but will not say it in public, because they can beat us up and use it as a campaign issue, and they've been doing it for 30 years. So anyway, I agree completely with what Ted is saying, what Mike is saying. We need to do another bill. We need to do private accounts because it's what everybody wants. And let's get some enthusiasm from the young people for it rather than just giving them the green eye shade.
You know, Rand, I have to note that my chief of staff observed that given the trajectory of Obamacare, it may end up being the case that if someone needs a prostate exam, that they have to go to the TSA.
I have one more policy question, and that's very simple. It's when are we going to audit the Federal Reserve? I think it's a popular issue with our crowd, and so I wanted to ask, do you see that coming up again? I know you all sponsored a bill to do that in the Senate, and it passed the House, but not the Senate. Do you see it growing traction in the Senate?
Well, you know, it passed overwhelmingly. Every Republican, I think, save one, and 100 Democrats, and it passed. So it came over to the Senate last year, and I called Harry Reid, and I said, well, you've been for auditing the Fed in the past, right? And he said, yes, I was. I used, you know, and I have to check. I'm not sure if I still am. However, we decided to encourage him, so my crack staff found all of the old video. There's great video of him, probably 2 or 3 floor speeches, 5, 10-minute speeches, saying how he absolutely believes in auditing the Fed. I haven't given up hope on it, and in fact, I spoke with him this week about it. So, but it's a long shot. But I think it still has momentum. You know, it has a lot of momentum in the House. Unfortunately, you know, we'd have to repass it in the House again. But there are good people over there. I think between Justin Amash and Thomas Massey, I bet you we can get it passed.
Do you think you have the votes for it in the Senate? Do you think there's enough votes? Just Harry Reid
Probably not. We would have to have a big election in 2014. It's not going to pass under a Democrat. There really aren't many Democrat votes for it.
Now, what about?
We got Bernie Sanders. He's with us.
Yep, we had Bernie Sanders.
Well, and I will say this. I had dinner recently with a freshman Democrat and raised this issue with him and asked his views. And at least over dinner, he said he fully supported auditing the Fed. Now, a lot of people say things over dinner and they don't quite materialize on the Senate floor. But I thought that was a promising thing. And I will note, look, with Bernanke stepping down and a new Fed chair, or if any of y'all have seen the animated video, the Bernac. If anyone's seen that, that's one of the funniest things. But with a new Fed chair confirmation, often in the Senate, when you've got something like a confirmation that gives the opportunity to leverage, you know, I would certainly hope that working together, we can force a vote on the audit of the Fed bill in the Senate.
If the Republicans regain the Senate in 2014, is Senator McConnell, assumingly would be the leader, has he mentioned anything that he would put forth a vote? Have you asked him that question?
I haven't asked him directly, but I think we have a really good chance if we take over getting an audit Fed bill through.
And then Obama will certainly sign it, I'm assuming, too. Right?
We're hoping for a new president soon.
On that note, we're coming to a close. I just want to say any last inspirational words. We have 300 plus leaders here. We have over 550 people in attendance this evening. Anything you want to leave parting words to the youth of this country and give us a little bit of hope after all these kind of dire situations we're currently in? And you want to go down the road, sort of leave final remarks.
This fight's worth fighting. We can win it. Yes. Because we're right. There are certain benefits that come with being right. One of those benefits, I believe, happens to be that being right makes us consistent with our 225-year-old governing document. And it's also something that makes us consistent with what political philosophers have been telling us for centuries. You know, we go back to Locke, we go back to Montesquieu, and we discover that these principles that were in our founding document and still are not new. They weren't new at the time of the founding. They're principles that are true, and they work because they're true. And if we remain true to those principles, we'll prosper as a society. There's a reason why this document has fostered the development of the greatest civilization the world has ever known. And those reasons have a lot to do with the fact that they work because they're true. So because we know that, let's stick with that. Let's stay with those principles. Stay the course. Yeah, we'll be ridiculed because there's something about excessive power. It doesn't like competition, and it's jealous of anything that challenges its own claim to power. But those who hold that view aren't right. We are. And if we band together, if we continue to spread our message, we'll win.
I think Mike is completely correct that we're right. We are fighting for eternal principles that are not esoteric. But the biggest thing that I want to say to y'all is critical to winning this fight is each of you. There is a new paradigm playing out in Washington, and it's one that has entrenched politicians in both parties very, very nervous. And that paradigm is that grassroots activists getting engaged in massive numbers can win public policy battles here in Washington. We talked about Rand's heroic filibuster. The only reason Rand was able to prevail in that filibuster was because lovers of liberty all across this country got engaged, spoke up, got on Twitter, got active, and it was your involvement that led to the next day forcing President Obama to do what he refused to do for 3 consecutive weeks, which is admit in writing that the Constitution limits his power to target U.S. citizens. Likewise, on the gun battle, the three of us stood side by side as on issue after issue after issue. But let me tell you, after that tragic shooting in Newtown, the momentum was entirely with President Obama. Conventional wisdom in this town was that the president's anti-gun agenda could not be stopped. And what happened with guns was a replay of what happened with drones, which is thousands upon thousands of Americans got involved, began calling their senators, began speaking out and saying, stand up and defend the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Yeah! And because of your involvement, when it came to the Senate floor, every single one of President Obama's proposals to undermine the right to keep and bear arms was voted down on the Senate floor. And the importance of that is particularly acute now in a fight that once again Mike and Rand and I are fighting, which is in the next 61 days to defund Obamacare. Obamacare is a train wreck. It is the biggest job killer in this country. There is bipartisan consensus. It is not working. It is hurting the economy. It is hurting jobs. It is hurting the most vulnerable among us who are being forced to reduce their hours to 29 hours a week. It is driving up insurance premiums. And we have an opportunity in the next 61 days not to do another symbolic vote against Obamacare, which a lot of Republicans in this town like, but actually to stand together and to say, as all three of us have, that under no circumstances will we vote for a continuing resolution to fund the government that spends 1 penny on Obamacare. Yeah. Now, to underscore the importance of the men and women in this room, right now, we don't have the votes. We're not even close. We don't have the votes in the Senate. We don't have the votes in the House. To win this fight, we need 41 Republicans in the Senate or 218 Republicans in the House, and we don't have it. And I'm going to be perfectly candid. We can't win this fight. Mike Lee can't win this fight. I can't win this fight. Rand can't win this fight. No Washington politician can win this fight. The only people who can win this fight are you. The only way we win this fight is if the American people rise up in overwhelming numbers and demand of our elected officials to do the right thing and to stand for principle. This week, a national website was launched. Don'tfundit.com. Don'tfundit.com. I would ask every one of you to come to don'tfundit.com, sign the national petition at don'tfundit.com, call your senator, call your member of Congress, and get 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 of your friends to do the same thing. If in the next 61 days we can get hundreds of thousands, or even better, millions of Americans to rain down upon our elected officials, that's the only way we win this fight. And it is the same model that won the drones fight. It is the same model that defeated the anti-Second Amendment legislation. It is empowering the grassroots to demand of our elected officials do the right thing. And that is the power you have. And I'll tell you what, all three of us are thrilled and honored to be fighting alongside each other.
It's about what you say, but it's also about how you say it. There's a painter by the name of Robert Henrine. I like what he writes. He says to young painters, he says, paint like a man coming over top of a hill singing. The image is a great image. My wife tells me not to sing, but I think of the Rock Trap family. Really, I think of sort of this great optimism. You think of a man coming over a hill singing. We need to proclaim our message. All right, that's but we need to proclaim our message in an optimistic way. We need to encourage people to come to us. The green shade economics, the green shade accounting isn't going to attract people. Liberty attracts people. Bill of Rights, our freedoms, all of that attracts people. And I think of passion. Patrick Henry had passion. We need to proclaim our message with passion. I think of the Proclaimers. I would walk 500 I would walk 1,000 miles to fall down at your door. That kind of passion. The kind of passion that young people have. And that's the kind of passion, and that's the way we need to proclaim our message. And when we do, I think we'll win again. Thank you, guys.